everyone. Today's presentation is on landscape lighting. Through this presentation, I'll run you all through the basic principle of outdoor lighting that needs to be followed, or the basic objectives and principles that one need to know while putting together the lighting concept for the outdoor areas. We will try and cover all the basic principles without getting into a lot of technical details. Wherever I have felt that at least knowing the technicalities, if not, I mean, it's too short a presentation to get into the detail and specifics of such technical calculations and understand them, but one should at least be acquainted with those terminologies. So we'll touch slightly on those notes and we'll discuss it further from there. So why exterior lighting? Very self-explanatory. Like how we use all our spaces in the day, the concept of designing our outdoor spaces is to expand the usage of those spaces in the night as well. Then obviously to visually enhance those spaces and at the same time provide the feeling of safety and security to the outdoor spaces. Now, while doing all of this, you will always come across a term that I'll keep mentioning is while we are introducing lights in the outdoor spaces to increase the usability or enhance it visually or brighten up spaces for safe usages, we'll always avoid light pollution. It's a term that I'll keep repeating, but we'll discuss this term in detail a little further in the presentation. Now, outdoor lighting, the understanding of outdoor lighting should not be restricted to only lighting up your garden spaces or planting and pathways, but it's a broader term than that, and it incorporates a lot of other elements. To start with, a landscape architect needs to look into the street lighting. Now, is lighting up streets, or the fixtures that we need to light up our streets, makes a major impact on the appearances of the road scheme in the whole urban design. It has to be very carefully planned, and it should, one should start thinking about it as a part of the overall design concept from the initial design stage. Particular attention should be paid to the functional quality, and utmost care should be taken, again, like I said, to avoid light pollution. Now, while one is designing the street lighting, you are taking care of creating dark patches because you want to avoid vandalism or encourage criminal activities, making sure that the neighborhoods become secure because the streets are properly lit up and pedestrians are comfortable using them in the night time, and at the same time adding to the appearance of the entire urban design. If you look at the diagram on the right hand side, uh, you will see that's a section of a streetscape, and it demonstrates how, while we are deciding what type of fixture and what's the height of the fixture for the light that we need to design our streets with, we need to take into consideration the scale of our streets, um, how wide is our street, how tall are the existing features along our streetscape. We should avoid any conflict with existing vegetations. If we are proposing any vegetations under our lights, we should take into consideration the future growth of those vegetations, and the lights eventually should not conflict with them. Second, the color of the lights are also important. Uh, It is also correlated with the lux level and the luminance of light. There's a wide range of lights that are available in outdoor lighting, and those technicality to help a landscape architect with those technicalities, you always have lighting consultants who come in to explain to you what the various exposure to lights, what kind of impact, like using certain lights can have, and accordingly one decide what lights is suitable to its context. While putting all of it together, a balance always needs to be struck between the functional and the aesthetics of a space. One cannot be compromised for the other. A little technical knowledge on deciding street lighting is that two things that at least a landscape architect needs to know when you're conceptually putting your street lighting together is, first, what should be the height of your, approximately what should be the height of your street lights, and on what distance should they be spaced. Now, if you see the box on top, there is a mathematical calculation. Now, this calculation is used by lighting consultants to derive on those two answers. You can just read it. We will not get into that. We will not get into the detail of those technicalities. However, landscape architects have a basic thumb rule understanding of how to design streetlights and how many of them should come into your design. The thumb rule is very simple. Approximately the height of your light is more or less the same as the width of your road or street. And the spacing between two light fixtures is approximately 2.5 to 3 times the height of your street lamp. So using that thumb rule, that understanding, that basic understanding is more than enough for you to decide the number of fixtures that you start putting along your road in your design. After you have finished your conceptual design, is these drawings are vetted through lighting consultants, and then they use this formula that you see up here to derive on the actual numbers, and then they produce a lighting plan based on a landscape architect's concept, which is further followed. Now, choosing the right kind of light fixture is also very important for streetscapes. If you see these 4 diagrams, there are 2 demonstrations on top show 2 kind of light fixtures where the kind of light or the angle of the light discourages the light to spread upwards, which limits or which reduces light pollution. Whereas the 2 light fixtures at the bottom, the way they are designed, they are letting light or they're, instead of just restricting the fall of the light towards the ground where it is required, a portion of the light also is thrown upward, and this increases the light emission towards the sky, which enhances light pollution. Now, type of lights or lamps that has been used in progression is that earlier the convention, slightly earlier times, the conventional lamps that we were using for street lamps were metal halides. Now, these metal halides were very bright lights, and we used them for streets, parking areas, sports lighting. But the negative aspect of these lights were that they emitted a lot of light and contributed a lot to the light pollution. Consequently, to cater to that problem came in HPS, also known as high pressure sodium lights. Now, these lights compared to the metal halides were comparatively efficient, and it required very less maintenance. They were fairly low on energy consumption. Even but they were still very they were less on energy consumption compared to the metal halides, but they were still not very environmental friendly. So from high pressure sodium lights, low pressure sodium lights were, technology progressed and there were low pressure sodium lights available in the market. They were very similar, but they were better on energy consumption. From there, eventually we moved on to what is extensively used today and you will always hear about these lights around you, are the light emitting diodes or LED lights. Now, this has developed in the last 5 to 6 years. They're highly energy efficient. The only negative aspect is that they emit a lot of blue light. Now, blue light is in the spectrum of light, the lowest spectrum of light that's visible to the human eye. Now, blue light has recently become a huge debatable topic while designing lights for outdoor use as well, because it is said that overexposure of blue light can be harmful to human visuals, or it can cause impairments. So there are a lot of companies who are working on improving the efficiency of LED lights as well. Now, these LED lights, in combination with solar panels, can drastically further minimize the demand of electricity or our dependency on energy consumption. So, in today's time, when you are designing outdoor lighting, the most efficient form of lamp that one can use are the LED lights that are available in the market. Now, around 2003, 2004, this entire awareness of light pollution, the harmful causes it has on our environment started rapidly growing. India recognized this problem. A lot of state governments started actively working towards it. They came up with plans to improve the lighting schemes in the urban context. So these are two examples to quickly glance by. The first is a street, it's a green highway in Rajkot. It's called the 150 feet ring road. The picture on the left hand side that you see, that's how the road was lit up earlier. Uh, the lamps hardly produced efficient light to light up the whole highway, and the distance between the lights were also not adequate enough. And then when the government came up with a green vision, street improving the quality of street lighting was one of the most important point or mission of that green vision. And this entire highways light, the lamps were changed to LED lights. The distances between the lights were improved. They were properly calculated, and they were spaced adequately. And you can see the drastic change between both, the like how the street looked before and then after that exercise was done, the drastic change that brought about that came about in the street. On the second hand, these couple of pictures that you see below, similarly, these are streetscape images from Calcutta. Similarly, the municipal board in Calcutta also realized the importance of changing the conventional halide lamps to LED lights to conserve energy and have a more efficient lighting system. However, what happened here is a very personal observation that while all the street lamps in the city were changed to LEDs, but at the same time, an immense emphasis was laid on beautifying the city. So all the city lamps throughout the city were covered in these, they were all wrapped up in these additional lights, which were not required. Similarly, the last image that you see, a lot of main roads, instead of having street lamps on either sides, as a part of the beautification program, additional lampposts were added, the lights which were technically not required. So as a result, a place like Gujarat has relatively seen a reduction in light pollution, whereas a city like Calcutta, where the intent was to reduce light pollution, but because a balance was not struck between function and aesthetics, the city has not seen any uh, reduction in the value of light pollution. So, the second classification in after street lighting is pathway lightings. So there are various ways one can light up all the pathways in your outdoor design. Now, these lights can be chosen on the basis of the width of your pathway. So the wider the pathway, you will require higher lights. The narrower your pathway goes, one can use just bollards because as per the height of these lights, the throw of the lights are directly proportional to height of the lights. So in the first picture, you can see that lampposts have been used to highlight the pathway. Then the second image, bollards uh, are throwing sufficient light given that the pathway is narrow. Then one can also use wall recessed lights to highlight pathways, or pathway markers, which are floor recessed lights, can also be used to highlight pathways. They also can work as wayfinders. From wayfinders, an interesting aspect of outdoor lighting is in the daytime when one is using a space, a lot of elements help you, like signages and uh, markings or written indications help one to, like wayfind and maneuver their way throughout a space. Now, in the evening or night times, lighting can play a very important role in helping one, sorry, the lighting in the evening can help give one the sense of direction. Uh, Signages, like adequate lighting to signages, help people to maneuver around. There are pathway markers that can be used in your design to indicate indicate the way for a person from point A to point B. There are floor recessed lights that can be used as markers, or there can be indicative lights along pathways that from a distance can give you a sense of direction. Then other aspect of outdoor lighting are all your pedestrian and bicycling paths. These bicycling and pedestrian paths have to be very carefully designed. Uh, So there's a principle in any kind of street lighting, be it street lighting or your pathways or your bicycle paths that you're seeing right now. The fundamental principle of lighting these areas are that at any given time, the glare of a light should not cause any hindrance to the eye of the user. For example, when we are designing street lights, the throw of the lights should not cause any hindrance to the eye of the driver. Similarly, when in these bicycle paths, when a rider is riding a bicycle, these height of the lamps or the level at which the lights are being installed has to be very carefully designed that they don't obstruct the visuals of a rider when the rider is riding by. So these are three examples that you can see. In the first, post lights have been used, but you can observe that the lamp that is being used, the light is directly focused towards the floor, and there is no horizontal glare that can cause a negative impact. In the second image, lights have been used along the parapet wall, which again have a sideway throw to the light, making it adequate for a bicycle path. In the third image, lighting has been concealed under the handrail, so which creates an indirect lighting, lights up the bicycle path without throwing any direct glare towards the rider. Then stadiums and sport facilities are also undertaken as part of your outdoor lighting concept. Uh, there are specialized lighting consultants who can help you to understand that what are the adequate specifications of lamps that can be used for specific sports. Every sport has a different requirement of lights. But when you're doing your overall landscape concept on a conceptual level, you have to take into consideration the functional light that's required for any sport that you are proposing. In softscape lighting, so uplighters or downlighters can be used to highlight your trees and shrubs in your landscape scheme. Now, these lighting mostly define the mood of your landscape. They are a part of aesthetic lighting. Like earlier, the lighting classifications that we are looking at were mostly functional, but when you want to create an ambient or a specific mood for your landscape design, you use such highlighters to highlight focal points or important elements in your landscape design. Underwater lights that you'll use to highlight your water features, fountains, swimming pools, also come into your landscape scheme. For example, for a pool, one has to strike a balance between the functionality and the aesthetics. Pool lighting is not only to just make the swimming pool look good, but it is the lighting has to be adequate for a pool user to use it. Also, the positioning of the lights has to be decided so that when one is swimming inside the pool, again the glare is not the glare will should not cause any disturbance to the swimmer. You also have pool light consultants to eventually help you out with the specifics of pool lighting. Also, around the pool, functional lighting for people who's using the space around the pool has to be taken into consideration. Water feature lighting is a very design specific lighting. It will be dictated by how you want your water feature to be appreciated in the evening, the drama or the mood that you want to create, or the kind of impact or effect that it should create in your overall landscape scheme. So in the first image that you see, there are these bubblers in the water feature, and only those bubblers have been lit up. Uh, the image on the left hand side is an interactive water fountain where every individual water jet has been lit up, and the rest two image in the image that's below where my cursor is, the where the waterfall, that area has been was intended to be the focal point, and the pebble bed of the water feature has been designed to be the highlight in the night. Whereas in the last image, the linear pattern of how the water falls, the intent was to highlight that, and hence a light fixture has been chosen accordingly. Now, all these lighting classifications that we were talking about, a public or a park space is a very good example where all of those come together. Uh, I put this slide together because all of you are now designing your landscape spaces, and you'll eventually start thinking of your lighting concept. So you will have pathways that you will have to light up, and it has to be functionally adequate. You'll have a lot of spaces where you would want people to come and use and sit, but at the same time you wouldn't want them to be over bright. So these kind of under step, like concealing lights under steps or treads, can be used where it creates light, but at the same time it doesn't over glare space. uh, Pathfinding lights can wherever you need to give once a sense of direction, and also provide minimal lighting that's required for one to move around, can be provided across your staircases or staircases or elevated pathways. Seats and benches can be highlighted with designing lights underneath them. Your trees can have focal lights wherever you require that they need to be enhanced. They also act as indirect light for the surrounding areas. Post lamps or bollards can be used in your scheme wherever you want to highlight areas which are smaller in width, where you don't need the throw of the light to be massive. There are a lot of floor lights, embedded lights that one can use just to create that visual impact. Now, when one starts the lighting concept, the initiation point of any lighting design is to identify your areas that require functional lighting and the areas that require aesthetic lighting. So all your pedestrian walkways, your staircases, entry to your buildings, access to buildings, your swimming pools, all these areas, you cannot compromise on the functional lighting. Uh, After you have decided your functional lighting, all your landscape elements that you want to focus on, that you want to create an impact in the evening, that you want to draw people's attention towards, you will start designing aesthetic lighting around them. Now, to create these aesthetic lighting, there are a lot of lighting effects and techniques that one can use. So I'll take you through few of them. The first technique or a lighting effect is uplighting your landscape elements or features. As you can see in the images, spike lights, these lights that you see on the floor are called spike lights. So these spike lights can be installed below your landscape elements, and you can adjust the angle of the beam to suit how you want your landscape element to be highlighted. The second technique is focusing or highlighting walls. There are two techniques of doing that. The first is grazing, the second is wall washing. Though both of them are techniques to highlight walls, the basic difference between both of them is we use grazing lights or we use grazers where we want to highlight walls which have some sort of pattern, undulation, textures, or difference in levels. So the principle is that you use a uniform light, but the visual effect of this light is not uniform because there is texture on the wall and there is play in levels. There will be shadows created. Whereas when you are wall washing, you can break the lights because you are highlighting smooth surfaces. Here the intent is to only draw focus towards the wall. So you can break the lights, but your distribution of light is uniform and your walls get highlighted. Shadowing is another technique where you place a light in front of the object and it'll have a flat surface behind on which it can cast a shadow. Moonlighting is a technique to create an ambience where you fix lights on trees or higher vertical elements which cast or try to replicate the same effect that a moon does in the evening or night for us. Backlighting landscape elements, backlights in the form of LED strip lights or LED lights can be used where you want to only highlight the edge of an object. Silhouetting is another technique where you again place a light in front of an object to create a silhouette on a vertical element at the back. So if you can see in this image, the light is placed in front of this tree and what you see on the wall is a silhouette or a shadow that's casted by the tree. Usually this kind of lighting concept is or lighting technique is used to create a sense of drama in your landscape design. Then we have spotlighting. Here fixtures are again placed at a higher level. It can be strapped around trees and the beam of the light is focused over an object to create a focal light around that object. Another technique of lighting that's used mostly in shrub areas or planting areas is spreading, where a low height light is used. And these lights are designed with shield on tops, which help in expanding the light over shrubs and ground covers. Step lighting, uh, like I was showing you the in the park lighting concept that when you are designing steps or staircases or stair walls, instead of having bollards or direct lighting, you can also explore indirect lighting by concealing light under the steps or using recessed lights on the treads or on the side of the parapet wall to light up those areas. Now, the general the general principle that one needs to take into consideration when you are developing your landscape concept is that one needs to use light only where it's needed. Always try and avoid any unnecessary light because it will only create an overkill of light and increase light pollution. We need to be extremely sensitive and respect the neighborhood that's surrounding our lighting design, because wrongly placing any light can spill over and disturb the privacy of people around it. Uh, False headlamps or their angles or extra glare could disturb drivers on the roads and can cause accidents. Uh, we need to design lights to minimize energy consumption. We need to try and reduce blue light emissions. Though right now, currently, it's not possible to avoid blue light completely, but we can be sensitive towards the fact that by not overusing lights or by using them efficiently, we can reduce the exposure to the blue light. Yeah, reduce the exposure to the blue light. Use shielded fixtures so that we restrict the extra emission of light towards the sky and avoid light pollution. Now, by avoiding light pollution, we have to be sensitive towards the human health and all the other ecosystems that coexisting with us. Now, throughout all this discussion, you've been hearing that whatever we do, we have to be sensitive and careful about discouraging light pollution. So we will just quickly understand what exactly is light pollution. Now, light pollution, to simply put, is any visual disturbance which is caused due to excessive or inappropriate or misdirected artificial light. This results when light is thrown upwards and outwards instead of the light pointing down towards the street. Now, this can be caused by using or cluttering a lot of lights together, which results in excessive light emission. Now, when we design lights where excessive lights is thrown back into the sky, there is an effect that is caused, which is called the sky glow. Now, what is sky glow? Sky glow is the light that is accumulated from very poorly designed lights. Like I told you, if you are not restricting the light from just being thrown towards the ground, it is scattered towards the sky as well. Now, this light that goes up to the sky gets scattered by dust and water vapor into the atmosphere, creating a light dome over cities and towns. Uh, we keep talking about in cities that we have lost the visual clarity of the night sky, or stars are not visible to us, and we keep blaming just air pollution as the cause of it. But you'll be surprised to know that it is not just air pollution, but light pollution till an extent also plays a huge role uh, in reducing this visibility of night sky. And this light dome that is created over the cities and towns, it's visible from miles away, and this the sky glow starts interfering with night observations and causes discomfort to us visibly as well. We don't realize it consciously, but it causes a lot of discomfort in our night vision. Now, light trespass. Another cause of light pollution is light trespass. Light trespass is the excessive light that spill over onto someone else's property. Uh, I will explain this to you eventually in the presentation by showing you a project where lighting design was very carefully selected to avoid light trespassing. Glare is nothing but excessive brightness, which causes visual discomfort. And using fixtures which has excessive glares increases light pollution. Now, as landscape architects, why we need to be so sensitive towards light pollution is because if you can look at the pie chart on your right hand side, that if we break the entire light pollution, 40% of the light pollution is mainly caused by street and vehicle lights. So, as urban designers or landscape architects, when we are designing the streetscape or the areas, we are directly or indirectly contributing to light pollution. So, the more knowledge we have, the more awareness we have, we can cater to this problem and avoid it from growing bigger than what it already is. Now, according to a survey done in between 1993 to 2013, if you can see our map below. So between 1993 to 2003, all the like the green dots that are indicated in the map shows the level of light pollution. Whereas from dark green to light green, it's a low range of light pollution. And as it progresses to an orange and a darker red indicates that the increase in the light pollution. So with the massive increase in urbanization, one can see how light pollution across the countries and mostly concentrated towards bigger towns have immensely increased. Hence, earlier when we were talking about different classification of lights or different usage of lights, I kept repeating as to however we design a light fixture, the basic principle of never encouraging light pollution or unnecessarily using light or using glares that causes any discomfort should be discouraged. Now, this is a very simple diagram to understand what I just spoke about. So, a simple installation of a street lamp, this beam that falls towards the road is the light that is actually required. Anything in excess of this is creating light pollution. Uh, the glare, the additional glare, the additional glare zone that you see is trespassing into the neighboring house, causing the residents living here discomfort. They'll have to always keep their curtains or like windows shut because of the light entering into their house. Then there is an amount of light which gets scattered directly upwards towards the sky, which again, because of, like I said, the water vapor and dust, gets reflected back and creates an envelope over our cities. So the intent is to use lights which are efficiently designed to restrict the throw of this upward light, or should not cause these glare zones. It should only focus on the area that requires to be lit. Now we will look at a few case studies and understand how all these lighting concepts that we were discussing gets used when uh, these public parks or spaces are put together. So the first case study is a city garden in St. Louis, Missouri. This garden is actually a sculpture garden. It has, so this is how the garden looks throughout the day. This garden is a mix of outdoor installations of more than 2 dozen sculptures, a huge wall that cuts across the garden, and a lot of other features like water bodies, native vegetation, seats, for the people to, like use the space and enjoy the space. So it's a very lively park during the day. It's flooded with people. So the lighting, so the landscape architect for this garden collaborated with two lighting designers. One lighting designer took up the responsibility of lighting up the entire park functionally as well as aesthetically, whereas the other lighting consultant or the lighting designer focused only on lighting up the art installations in the park making sure that they are appreciated in the nighttime as well as they are ergonomically lit up. Now, on the left-hand side, picked up two images of the sculpture installation in the garden. Now, now you see the lights that have been embedded in the floor to highlight these sculptures. The other reason such lights were also used was because a lot of sculptures in these gardens were intended not only to be appreciated visually, but are also interactive in nature. Like children are encouraged to climb on top of them. So these lights were embedded in the floor so that they don't come in human contact or cause any problem when people are interacting with the sculpture. The wall that's cutting right across the park is also beautifully lit up, and if you see, this light is spilling over the pathway and there's no additional light provided for the pathway because this is sufficient for the pathway to be lit up. Whereas the other pathways all across the park has lightings concealed within the planting so that there is no excessive glare and sufficient lighting, and it provides as much as lighting that's required to light up the pathway. Water features are enhanced. There's an interactive spray plaza in the park, which is a highlight of the park. So in the day, it looks like this, whereas in the night, every water jet has individual LED lights at the bottom, and that light ups the entire spray plaza, making it exuberant and exciting. And kids are usually seen playing in this water jet even in the night. The second case study is of a very popular project, the High Line, which most of us are acquainted with, and we have discussed this project a lot of times. Uh, I'm sure we all know that High Line is an elevated park. It was created out of a redundant railway line across Manhattan. Now, with the park being established or conceptualized, this elevated park became a very lively space for people to come, relax, unwind, or appreciate the cityscape in the day. The lighting designer or the lighting concept also took up the same challenge, but the intent was to keep it very simple and appreciate the nightscape of the city at the same time without overusing lighting in the design. So the lighting was kept very simple, sophisticated, yet efficient. If you can see in the image, consciously no light has been kept or installed which is above the eye level. Everything was kept low to the ground. It was concealed or designed in a way where it provides functional lighting, but at the same time doesn't create any unobstructive light in the night to its busy urban context. Lights were embedded underneath the benches, so it throws or it provides indirect light lighting up the pathway, but there is no upward glow. So when people are sitting and enjoying this space, they get best of both the ambience. They get functional lighting, but at the same time they can enjoy the natural. They can appreciate and enjoy the skylight. Very soft LED lighting has been concealed within planting to enhance it. Even in the staircases and stair walls, lighting has been incorporated underneath the handrails to light up the staircases. There is this tunnel. There's one section of the High Line where this tunnel, and suddenly the lighting dramatically changes. This tunnel overlooks the Hudson City only in such areas where probably the intent was to create this drama. There is this use of blue and white LED tube lights, but otherwise the entire High Line is very simple and very sophisticatedly lit up. And this project is a very good example where LED lights have been used for energy saving. The lighting level, technique, and the equipments used have preserved the view of the city nightscape beautifully. The third case study is of a residential apartment project in Mumbai, Bhandup. I purposely picked up this project to demonstrate that projects may vary in scale, size, context, but the principles more or less remain the same. Now, this is an urban project that most of us will be able to relate. It's in the heart of the city. There are two towers. There's a clubhouse and the outdoor spaces around it. So the functional lighting zones have been highlighted in this slide. So the pathways or the driveways all around the towers and the focal areas like the arrival experiences, the clubhouse and the swimming pool area, entry to the towers, the recreational or the sports area or kids play areas. These areas were identified for functional lighting, and the other elements in the landscape could be aesthetically enhanced. So well lit arrival experience. Here, while these screens were designed to provide a visual screening between the neighboring property and this project, the earlier intent was to light these screens from behind the screens. But on doing that, it created a massive discomfort to the neighboring project. A result of which the light was bought at the front, and this screen got lit up from the front instead of being backlit. Now, by doing that, this metal screen emits a certain amount of light on towards the road. The reason of which street like big post lights or pole lights were avoided and small wall mounted lights were introduced because these two together provided sufficient lighting for the driveway. So these small thing demonstrates that uh, one needs to be careful and sensitive towards not just your project but the cause and effect it will have on its neighboring surroundings as well. So the same driveway lit up with small bollards on the other side and screen walls. The entry to the blocks were lit up brightly. Small bollards highlighting the softscape, whereas the entry to the buildings are lit up lightly again. Feature walls backlit, whereas the driveways and the walking pathways have functional pole lights. Now, one thing to observe in this image is when I was talking about street lighting or streetscape lighting, I mentioned that the thumb rule of choosing a light fixture is that the height of the light should approximately be equal to the width of the road. Here, this width that you see, that this light post had to lit up was 6 meters. So this light post by the thumb rule had to be 6 or 5 meters in height, but we restricted the light fixture to a height of 3 meters. Reason being, any light above that height would cause discomfort to the residents who live on the first floor. So in collaboration with the lighting consultant, we work out a way where we could reduce the height of the pole, but increase the lux of the light level slightly so that we get a bigger throw of the light and the areas still get adequately lit up. The swimming underwater lights for the swimming pool areas and the trees have been highlighted, so also creating a silhouetting or a shadow effect on the building. All the pathways have post lights as part of the functional lighting. Again, for the sports areas, the light fixtures, the angle and the beam of these light fixtures were carefully designed so that it causes no discomfort to the residents living on the lower floors. Areas where otherwise one would have liked to highlight the softscape, but we didn't do that. Reason being that these entry lobbies were already lit up too bright and had a spillover on the planting. So adding additional light would be an overkill. So this is a good example of demonstrating that one should not use lights where it's not required. Again, functional light for the pathways. This image I've used to show that one should be careful of avoiding conflicts like these, where the light fixtures, eventually when the trees grow up, they start covering the lamps, which this is an example of what should not happen. So hence, when we are conceptualizing a landscape concept, the lighting concept should also be conceptualized right at the beginning so that such conflicts can be avoided. Lighting concept, this is a graphical representation of a lighting concept done right at the beginning of your concept stage. Something that we would be expecting you to do for your landscape assignment as well. You need not get into detailed calculations or specifics, but once you have conceptualized your landscape design, your outdoor design, you have to start thinking of different, like, first you'll have to identify which areas of your design requires functional lighting, and then which are the areas that you want to aesthetically enhance, and accordingly arrive on a conceptual landscape design, which can be a very simple graphical representation where you start highlighting using symbols and or numbers, and against that you can specify what kind of light, and with images show the effect or impact that you're wanting in those areas. So this is a representation of what a landscape architect does with the lighting plan right at the concept stage. Then when we move on to a design development stage, a proper lighting plan is generated where we start specifying the light fixtures, and we start identifying the exact locations of where those light fixtures will be placed, and every light fixture has a symbol identifying the type of fixture that you're using. There is a legend to support that plan. That legend comprises of the symbol, the quantity of the lights that are used in the plan, the type of the light, the model, the color of the lamp used, and the wattage. And there's a cut sheet to always support your lighting plan where you show the kind of lighting effect that you're proposing and the kind of fixture that you're proposing to create that kind of impact. This is another example of a landscape lighting layout. So you can see the different symbols have been used to propose different light fixtures. So like there are steps going up, there are step lights on the side of the step, there are uplighters highlighting lights. So yes, that's about it.
Thanks, Vanita, for this wonderful presentation.
Anybody wants to add anything onto it if something important got missed out?
No, I think it was fairly comprehensive. I mean, the other faculty members can actually, let's step in. There are any points.
Does student have any questions regarding anything that was shown or explained?
Any questions, any doubts, or any observations that you want to make, students?
Hello. I just have like a small question. I missed out on that thumb rule distance between the two fixtures of the street light. Could you please repeat that?
Sure. So the thumb rule of deciding what the height of your light fixture is that the height of the light fixture is equal to the width of your road. So for example, if it's a 5-meter road or it's a 6-meter road, the light fixture can be 6-meter high or 5-meter. Like it's width of the road minus a meter is also acceptable. Now the spacing from one light fixture to the other light fixture, the thumb rule is that whatever is the height of the light, the distance can be 2.5 to 3 times the height. So if it's a 5-meter light fixture, so between two light fixture, the distance can be 15 meters.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions, students?
I had a question. So,
Yes.
just a few years ago, the Marine Drive it had those halogen lamps, and then they were changed to white LEDs, but they were quite opposed, so they changed it back to yellow LEDs. So, is it that white light is more effective, or it is kind of more preferable for roads than yellow light, or is there any preference like that? Like visibly improves in white light than yellow light, or vice versa?
So LEDs also are available in a variety of light spectrums. Like there is white, there's a warm yellow in LED lights as well. So these lights are selected as per the requirement of a space. If I'm sorry, but I exactly don't know what was the issue that was caused for the Marine Drive lighting. I'm aware that around Marine Drive area, there was a lighting scheme done, and there was a lot of public complaints because the neighbors were receiving a lot of glare from those lights. So I have read something like that back in time, and I remember that. So I don't know if these two issues are the same, because the similar issue was caused by the Gymkhana lighting or the stadium lighting in that area as well. So I assume that it was the excessive glare that was causing problem, and they had to change from white to yellow. But I don't think so that LEDs would be changed back to halides in this point of time, because that will be a very wrong thing to do. You would rather change from, if you've installed white LED lights, you could still change from white LED lights to warm white or warm yellow, warm white LED lights to reduce that glare, excessive glare.
Yeah, I think the question, Banita, was also regarding color temperature. Uh, so you must have mentioned it in the beginning, right? About that there is this, the cool lights which are actually more bluish in color or very white in color, and then the warm in color. So the Ishan, just to kind of add to what Banita said, in lighting, usually there are two ranges of lights that we kind of prefer. In landscape lighting, if like it's measured in some in a unit called Kelvin. So if it's like 2,500 to, let's say, around 3,500 or something, it's generally considered to be, on a cooler range of temperature. While 3,500 and above, it's considered to be warm, because daylight, I think, is around 6,000 to 7,000 Kelvin is what daylighting is. So in landscape, when you highlight a tree, for example, or when you have trees, and if you have cooler light that kind of falls on it, then the green shows up as green. While if it's a warmer light, then the colors tend to kind of change, on a warmer palette. So yeah, I mean, it's to do with color temperature as well, and the way that we perceive spaces also change when it's white light as opposed to, let's say, the yellowish hue light, which we are so used to seeing in urban cities in the past.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions, or can we move to the individual channels?
I think there's one in the chat box.
How can we take care of the problem of insects? Any specific trees or bushes?
Okay. So, if I understand correctly, you're referring to a problem where lights will attract insects?
Yes.
Let them exist in peace and nature. uh, okay. So, the only logical answer to this would be that if you are designing a space where you know that a lot of people will come and congregate and use that space, so it will be logical to avoid direct lighting or those lamps which will attract a lot of flies and restrict your design to indirect lighting. I mean, that's the only way you can avoid that. Otherwise, in outdoor lighting, we advise that we stay, in fact, sensitive towards all ecosystems. So I think all these insects and all can just exist in harmony. Any specific tree or bushes? Can you elaborate? What do you mean by that?
Uh, like some of the bush, like some of the like bushes have the some of the bushes have the tendency like they don't attract like the insects don't go around them. So do you have some specific uh, uh, type of bushes or trees? Like whenever we go to like garden in the evening, so there are a lot of insects that like uh, disturb. So that's why I was asking.
There are, though I think this is out of context of lighting, but because you have asked, there are specific species of plants which have these properties of repelling insects. For example, citronella or lemongrass. They have this, but one needs to also study them in depth and understand that for them to have that impact or to be able to keep insects away, they have to be used or planted in a huge amount. You can't just like plant a little of those and expect like bigger results. Sandeep, would you like to comment on that?
No, I think what you said is absolutely right, Bandita. And also citronella, unless it's crushed, citronella is like lemongrass. So unless it's crushed, or like unless the chemicals are released, it doesn't really affect the insect. So
Yeah.
like insects are also a part of the world, right? I mean, I liked Bandita's answer. Like let them live. It's we humans who kind of concentrate these lights, and insects have a natural property of getting attracted to light. So and it's us who kind of create these these tall towers and mast poles with such close proximities, and we kind of invite them to kind of be close to it. So my answer would be let them live. Yeah, that's what even I would say. Trees and plants, yes, there are, but then the truth is, unless they are crushed, they are, I mean, like it's as good as being there. Like I've seen people say, oh, neem is a good insect repellent, but then neem ke ped pe bhi there are lots of insects that live on. So it's only the neem oil that you kind of extract out of the leaves, and then you kind of use it. That's the only time when it becomes effective. Prasad says we had some electives where it was mentioned that these lights facing the sea, marine impacts animal behavior like migration pattern, etc. That's absolutely true, Prasad. It's not just about marine animals, but even birds. So and that's what Bandita was explaining, right? Night sky pollution. Yeah, Bandita, over to you. You can tell them.
No, continue, continue. I was saying this, I was about to say the same thing, that even birds get confused by the lights that are reflected off the buildings and they go crashing into it. It confuses them. And the same thing is with the migration pattern of these marine habitats also, when inappropriate lighting is done along the coastal areas. So that is a problem. And lighting consultants do, I mean, sensitive lighting consultants do work out lighting strategies to not cause that.
Yeah, yeah.
So the only way out of it is that, see, with urbanization, where you will propose buildings or habitats, will come lighting. Though we keep talking about to create a ecologically sensitive lighting and all of that, but lighting is inevitable. So, and when they come, they will have an impact on the natural habitat. So the only way to avoid that is to be sensitive about the extent that we expand our urbanization towards places which are ecologically very rich should be left undisturbed, is what my personal take on it is. Yeah, sorry, Sandeep, you were saying
Yeah.
something.
No, I think you explained it well, Bandita. Sarth has a question. There was an experiment in Scotland, which was successful, wherein blue street lights decreased crime rates and suicides. A simple change in color of light having such an effect in the society. Bandita, yeah, that's an
Sorry.
interesting observation. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, I had no clue about it.
I am not aware of this, honestly. I would love to read about it and learn the facts behind it, but no clue at this point.
Yeah. And I think so that's what color temperature really affects mood, and color temperature also kind of helps us, kind of see the space in a different light sometimes, like quite literally. I think I made a goof up when I mentioned the color temperature earlier because the warmer light ranges are towards the lower Kelvin, like 2700 to 3300 is the warmer range. That is when you get the yellowish kind of color, and the cooler range is the higher Kelvin temperature, 3300 to 5000 something, and daylight is 6500 Kelvin. So, yeah, so like sunlight uh, is actually cooler than the yellow lights that we have. So this is called the perceptive temperature. I mean, it doesn't have anything to do with the real, the heat that it generates, but this is a perceptual kind of a temperature gradient that we talk of.
Yeah, so I asked the earlier question because mm, for most of the people that I have met, there is a general perception that yellow light makes the streets feel unsafe. So, because they feel a bit gloomy, and that's why white light is more preferable for the streets to feel safe. So, I don't know how true is that, but yeah.
So I am not very sure, but this conversation reminds me of an article that I had come across that this thing was done in train stations in Japan also, where these lights were changed to blue light, and I think the concept was the same that Sandeep was saying, that it just had an different effect on the mind of the people, and there were less accidents, like, yeah, suicide accidents, now that I think of what I had read. Yes.
Yeah, and I think it also depends on the geoclimatic situation of the place and the general psychology of the people. Like for example, Scandinavian countries, the kind of experiments that they do with light would probably be closer to the kind of daylighting that they have and how they are used to seeing generation after generation. But then for us in India, things may be a bit different also, because our light conditions that we are used to are, the happy moods and, the depressed moods that we have, and our associations with light may be very different, and I see this very, particularly because I grew up in coastal Kerala, and then half of my life I spent in Delhi, and now that I'm in Mumbai, I can really see the difference, like और कोई बोलेगा अरे दिन तो दिन होता है बट वो बात नहीं है इवन द लाइट क्वालिटी ऑफ द सिटी or the way that I perceive a city and the way the light falls at certain times of the day, it's very different in these places. Very, very different actually. Yeah. So, I think, yeah, it's a psychological way of, uh, you know, kind of molding how people think. So lighting does have a very, very important role to play in it, which is why if you go to a high-end restaurant, you would have the mood lighting is always, towards the warmer side, right? Like, if you're in a mall, like you're walking in the normal areas of a mall, like the public areas, it's always towards the cooler side, so that's the difference. Okay, if there are no other questions, then maybe we can break up into our groups because it's already 9:20. So we'd only get like effectively 2 hours to look at the works.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll stop the recording and then